Nick's still running around, but Peggy, come on up. So everybody, this is Peggy, and I don't know much about her homeschooling story, except I'm pretty sure that Jamie, the children's librarian at Pinehurst, probably homeschooled her. Okay. Am I right? Yeah. Good. I'm guessing. Yes, so she is Jamie Riley's daughter, so she's joined us today. And we have Mr. Nick from Emerging Technology. You may have seen him before on the Discovery Bus or going around with all the cool tech stuff like the VR and the 3D open houses. And he was also homeschooled. And I will let them tell you their stories. If you have any questions that you wrote down, you can give them to me, or we can go ahead and get started. You can raise your hand.
It's working. I love when it's working.
Absolutely. Take a seat. Here you
Oh.
Uh-oh. Did we
Hang on. Hang on.
Okay.
My cordy thingy. Hang on.
This is the one we're in.
Figure that might make it easier for Elizabeth to know kind of what we're doing today. But yeah.
Okay, I'll start. So, Mr. Nick, when did you start homeschooling? Did your parents start from the beginning and go all the way through high school, or how much homeschool did you do?
So a little bit of context. I am the second out of 8 kids. My older sister and my youngest sister, one of their birthdays is September 10th and one of their birthdays is September 8th, and those are 20 years apart. So that's kind of the context of my family, and all of my siblings, including me, were homeschooled from kindergarten all the way through high school. My mom still has one daughter right now who's going into her sophomore year in high school. So being homeschooled all the way through, and she's getting close to the end of that journey, but that's kind of the context. It was the entire chunk of time, all of education there until we went to North Idaho College or whatever those next steps were.
Great. Same question for you, Peggy.
So I was also homeschooled from kindergarten to high school. I did have a couple months in a Christian preschool, and I vividly remember going there and absolutely hating it. Nothing against them, but I did not like leaving my home, and I really enjoyed learning even at a young age. And I remember coming home from preschool one day and my mom sitting me down, and she's like, okay, what do you think about if you were home with me and I taught you? And I remember being so excited, and I was totally on board with it. And when I was older, probably high school age, my mom said, yeah, that was so scary for me because you loved learning and you seemed like you were really enjoying being social and going out and being at preschool, that I thought I would ruin your life taking you out of that. And it ended up, I am very, very grateful that she homeschooled us that entire time.
Great, thank you. And Elizabeth, how much homeschooling did you do in your childhood? What was that like?
I was homeschooled for 1 year in 3rd grade, and then I went back to public school for a couple years, and then was pulled out and homeschooled from 6th grade forward.
Thank you. And anyone else have a question at this time?
So looking back, what advice would you give to your parent? One thing that they did really well, that you really enjoyed in homeschool, and then what's one thing that you kind of prefer they've done something a little different?
Is that me?
Anybody who has an opinion.
Any of you, whoever starts first wins.
I think that what they did really well was they were proactive in making sure that our education was secure. As far as, I grew up in California, and for any of you who don't know, the homeschool laws there are essentially you cannot homeschool. It's not legal, so we had to register as a private school. And yes, my parents were very good about clearing all of that up. We got involved in I guess it's technically a homeschool co-op, but they were registered as a private school. So we, by being part of that, kind of got all the bases covered as far as not being bothered throughout our education by people coming in and trying to harass us. There was a school in our town that when my parents were initially trying to educate my sister and I at home, the school kept coming to our house and telling us, no, you can't be doing this. You have to put your kids into our school and we will call the police on you, and everything like that was going on. And I just really appreciate that my parents didn't give up easily on that, and then made sure they were going by the book and went to that group and got everything covered. And as far as like anything I think they should have changed, I know it's gonna sound terrible, but I don't really think there's anything I would have necessarily changed, because how it worked out for me, I think it was great. I think my mom's methods of educating us, I responded to very well. So there's not much I could say needed to be changed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that when I educate my own kids, I won't do it differently for them.
Okay. Nick or Elizabeth, would you like to respond?
If not, I can go, Elizabeth.
Sure.
All right.
As far as, I think that my parents did most of it right. And as I'm thinking about it right now, one of the primary things that my parents did is they were individualizing our education. Each one of us obviously is a different human being. We were all being homeschooled by the same parents, but they individualized our education based on our needs. So the math textbooks that my older sister and I did, it worked for us. That grind, getting it done, that repetition, that worked for us. We were getting it. My mom noticed that some of our younger siblings weren't getting it that way. So my mom and dad went looking for other options of other textbooks out there, other curriculum out there that would make it work for them. Another example of that is there was a homeschool group that I was able to do basketball with some friends of mine, and that's because they were doing it and they were my friends, and it was like, oh my gosh, you should join the team too. So I played basketball in my junior and senior year, and I was horrible, and we lost every single game. But it was something that my sisters didn't do that. Some of my brothers did, but some of my other brothers didn't. So there was that individualized education, but it was still my mom and my dad that were doing that for each one of us. And that was definitely a strength of my parents' educational model, I would say, is that individualized strategies for each one of us. If the curriculum was working, awesome. But if the curriculum was not working, it was, let's admit that and let's change it. The goal was to educate us, and I think they did a great job of that. I would say that so much of the time, negative experiences that I've heard from other homeschoolers, one of those is I didn't have any friends. I also, for the first 10 years of my life, was in Southern California, and then we moved up to North Idaho the summer between my 10th and 11th year. And friends was a big thing that we were concerned about. So many of our friends had also moved away from California, so it wasn't like we had this big group of people we were moving from. It's everyone was leaving. We didn't have a friend base. Now we were up here in Idaho. We didn't know anyone. So my mom had a couple of people that she asked, and they said, there's this church program. A lot of them are homeschoolers. You should go and do it too. And friends that I still have to this day came from that program. So my mom knew we had a need. We needed friends. She went to people that she knew in the area, and she filled that need for us. Once again, that personalized experience. And another thing I think my parents did well that I feel many homeschoolers might struggle with is, what do you do next? Which I know is kind of the topic of our conversation, but that individualized approach that my mom had, it was serendipitous that I'm a librarian today. I was 16 years old. I had one pair of khakis and I had one polo. My mom went into the library to get a book and she said, "Oh my gosh, there's a page position open. You should apply for that page position." So I sat down in my one pair of khakis and my one polo and my broken fingers, that the only bone in my body that was broken was this one, but I sat down the interview and I must have been articulate enough because they gave me the job, and I shelved books for the summer. And because I had a flexible schedule, I kept that job at the library, and there was more positions, there was more responsibility that the library continued to give to me, which was fantastic. But my brother, for instance, he was fantastic at going on Microsoft Paint, and he was doing digital arts without needing to. It wasn't something that it wasn't like a school project that he was doing. It was something he loved to do. So my mom and my brother sat down. North Idaho College was a resource, and we said, well, why don't you try digital arts? And then it was, you know what? Digital art also is, you also have a mind that works well with math. You know what if you went into engineering or something like that? Something right in between both of those is drafting, where you're working with an engineering firm and they're saying, draw this building for us, but you're the one doing more that technical side of, this wall is this thick and this wall is this height. My brother is a drafter in a local architect firm to this day. He's been there for 7 to 8 years now, something like that. But once again, I would say that my parents excelled in that individualized approach and filling that need of, I need friends. They found avenues to get us friends. And when it came to the end of them doing it, they were finding resources based on our interests, and they were either finding people that we could talk to, or they were saying, this is a resource in this area, and we are going to connect you with that resource.
Thank you. That sounds great that your parents individualized it that way. Elizabeth, did you want a chance to answer this question, or should we move to another question of what your parents did well, what they did not do well, or what you would have had them change? I read your story.
My experience was so different from your previous presenters. There was not a lot of positive to say. The only thing that my mother, because she was the one who did the homeschooling, did right was she allowed me pretty unfettered access to the public library. That was the sole source of my education from 6th grade forward. So the public library was a saving grace for me, but otherwise my experience was so wildly different. Everything was wrong. So
well, thank you for sharing how important the library was to you. That means a lot. I'm glad. So kind of, yes.
Elizabeth, could I ask a follow-up question? If there were many things that your parents did wrong in your education, is there a theme that some of those errors fit into, or is there one error that they continue to make that, or was there a primary thing that went wrong, or was it just all of it?
I think the primary thing was the reason. We were pulled out of public school because a mandated reporter called in CPS on my family when one of my younger sisters admitted to the domestic violence that had been going on in our home. And my mother stated the intent was so that no more mandated reporters could be involved in our family's business. So that was the beginning. And I think that's a really bad way to start homeschooling, right? To keep your kids in isolation so that nothing can see. And then the next piece was that she was not prepared to be a teacher for 7 to 9 children. There were 2 step-siblings who were with us part-time. I'm the oldest of 7, and there were 2 that came and went with their biological mother off and on. So she wasn't prepared to be a teacher, so I was never actually formally taught anything. Like, I never got a lesson. We had curriculums that were given to us every couple of years that we were supposed to teach ourselves, and that just didn't work for me. They were incomplete curriculums. They weren't always appropriate to the grade level. They were handed down to each child. They were not individualized, as the previous presenter was talking about, to each person or even to the appropriate grade level. So it was really a lack. It was unschooling is what I got.
Thank you for sharing that, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Does anyone have a question? Do you want me to? Oh yeah, good.
I have a question. So we've always homeschooled, and I'm towards the end of homeschooling, and I think you touched a little bit about those resources about like kind of child directed or interest based on like what's the next step. I'm kind of stuck on like what's the next step. I feel like I need a career counselor. And when I look back and think, okay, when I was in high school, I had a career counselor, and I think I met with him once, and he absolutely did nothing for me. So maybe I don't need a career counselor. But I feel like I don't have, other than the doctor, mechanic, lawyer, scientist kind of realm, like what other, I need like a resource on where I can teach my kids, okay, hey, these are your interests, so maybe look at this. And maybe I'm missing the creativity that your mom had. It's like, oh, drafting is great. This is a great in between. I kind of miss, like, I would have never thought of drafting for any of my kids, right? So I know that you got clicked in with the library at a younger age. So what about yourself? What are you doing now? Or what is Elizabeth doing now? And how did that kind of come into your lives and get introduced on what you're doing now? Does that make sense? Okay.
Elizabeth, do you want to touch on that? Would you like me to touch on that?
I'm sorry, it wasn't super clear. I was getting a little bit of
What do you do for a living?
Yeah, like what do you do for a living, or what did you do for a living, or are you working, or are you at home, which I think is amazing also. But how did you figure out what you wanted to do later in life coming out of your high school years?
Got it. So I didn't have a formal end of high school. We didn't do, any formal education, so I didn't get a diploma. I left home early and worked my way around the country.
Okay.
I worked manual labor jobs for many, many years.
Okay.
And got my GED while I was working. At about 20 years old, I got my GED. And then when I hit about 30 years old, I decided I had enough of manual labor, a minimum wage, and I was recently married at the time, and that allowed me to take out a student loan, go to college, and now I am a physical therapist assistant.
Oh, gosh. That's
Wow.
Okay, great.
Awesome.
And,
I am currently a stay-at-home mom.
okay.
I love it.
Really hard job.
It is with 2 little boys, and they drive me up the wall. I love it though. But before I ended up staying home, I worked at several different jobs. Not really job hopping, but kind of figuring out, because I have a lot of different interests, the beauty of kind of taking your time with things in your early 20s, like right after high school, is that you can figure out where you want to be and what you want to do. So I had, for about 2 years, I think, the opportunity to do marketing for my uncle. He had a company that was doing, I don't know exactly because I'm not techie in that sense, but they did a lot of computer tech for companies like or things like NASA, big stuff like that. And because it was the start of his own business, they were trying to kind of cut corners cost-wise, and I was willing to work for cheap. But I am very happy to say, I'm very proud of myself that all of the people involved in that company gave me very high praise, saying, oh, you actually know what you're doing and you listen and you're able to do this well. I quit working for them because I did not enjoy it, even though I was pretty good at it. And from there, a lot of people considered it a downgrade, but I ended up working at a spice and tea shop in our local town, which ended up being possibly the best job I've ever had and probably will ever have. And it's my experience there, because we worked with a lot of medicinal herbs. It's gotten me to think about possibly doing a business from home, mixing medicinal herbs for people. That's something that I've always been interested in. And I think, kind of going back to what you're saying, well, where do I steer my kids in the direction of, because you kind of think, not generic, but the typical, oh, well, you can be a doctor, oh, you can be whatever. Kind of getting your kids to think about stuff maybe they've always been interested in, like even from a young age. Because I found that, I mean, I've got a lot of different stuff, like I said, I'm interested in. There was a time where I'm like, oh, well, I like photography, I could do that. Or, oh, I'm really into music. What if I did something in music production or making music? And I've always kind of come back around to more of the herbalist approach. From something as silly as, there were these books I read as a kid. It's the Warriors Cat series. Yes, I loved that when I was like 10, 11, up to 13. Devoured those books. And one of the positions of the cats was to go out and find herbs in the wilderness, and they were the medicine cats. And to a preteen me, that was the perfect outlet for getting me interested in that. And it may sound silly, but as an adult, I'm like, hey, you know what? The author of those books actually put a lot of effort into doing their research. So when I was working at the spice shop, a lot of the herbs that I had read about in those books came up when I was working there. It's like, oh, these are actually used for the things that they were talking about. So one of the things that came up, because we made teas for people, was using honey, and in a medicinal way, not just sweetening things. And it's very antibacterial, antimicrobial. It's like, oh, well, in those books, they're gathering honey and they're putting it on wounds to clean the wound. That's something you can actually do in real life as human beings. And stuff like that, it's like, okay, I was a kid and it sparked my interest in something that now I'm 27, and hey, I use herbal medicine in my home and with my family, and maybe that's something where when I'm kind of past taking care of a 3 and a 1-year-old and I'm more focused on possibly starting a business out of my home, I can look into that. So definitely just kind of talk to your kids about, hey, what are things maybe when you were very young you had an interest in? Consider all different sorts of possibilities, and don't necessarily rush into a career right out of high school, because like I said, the options are endless. And I've tried several different things, and you kind of have to figure out what works with you. Kind of going back to what you're saying, the tailored education, that should kind of continue on into your adulthood, tailoring where you want your career to be, and really focusing on your interests and what is going to make you happy, also make you make you a living, but really deeply consider it, and don't just be like, well, this makes money, or oh, well, I like this, so I guess I have to stick to it. It's okay to change your mind. Again, not job hopping, but it's okay to look into different avenues and find what fits you.
Thank you.
back to friends, and I'm guessing, Elizabeth, you had a more negative experience with making friends through homeschool, but Peggy, what was your experience?
So I was actually talking to my mom about that this morning because, and I know you said this, a big concern with parents who are going into homeschooling and people who are outside of that is, well, how do your kids socialize and make friends? And for me, I never really had a problem making friends, in the sense that there were always people around who I could talk to and play with at a young age and get closer to as I got older. One of the biggest benefits was being part of a homeschool group. The way our group was set up was through school semesters, so spring and fall, we would get together every Friday, and then eventually it became every other Friday with all the local homeschool families. So we got, when I say we, it's me and my sister, but we got to socialize and hang out with kids from kindergarten to high school. So when I was in like the 3rd grade, which is when we joined that group roundabout, I look back and I realized, oh, one of my closest friends was a girl who was graduating high school, and she actually would seek me out and we would hang out. And it isn't like I was her only friend kind of thing. She had her friends in high school, but the nice thing about that was we had kind of a all-inclusive kind of opportunity to make friends, and friends that I still have from that homeschool group, our ages kind of range. So some of them are about 5 years younger than me, some are 5 years older than me, and we have very strong friendships still. The other thing is definitely letting your kids go out and meet people in your community outside of homeschooling. Probably my best friend, she is a girl who I grew up next to, like she was our neighbor. She grew up down the street from me, and she was public schooled her entire life. And her home life, aside from her parents just being very involved with her and her brother, we have that in common. Our families were just very involved. She didn't live a life like mine. I'm Christian, she's not. Again, homeschooled, public schooled. So we lived differently, but we ended up becoming very good friends to the point where our families kind of considered us almost to be siblings in a sense. So definitely the allowing your child to go out and explore their community, be part of extracurriculars, meet your neighbors. I know that a lot of kids end up kind of just holding up inside and not going out. I did see that, unfortunately, with some of the people in our group. It wasn't perfect, but yeah, just definitely just letting your kids get out there and meet other people.
Thank you.
How many hours a day did you apply to homeschooling?
That definitely varied as the years went on. As I got older, we spent longer days, but up until the start of high school, so graduating 8th grade, my sister and I really only spent, it was around 8 in the morning to 12 in the afternoon of really just sitting and applying yourself. Once we got into high school, because again, that was partially because of the state requirements in California, we had to log more hours by technicality. But then it ended up my senior year and my sister's senior year, we both, because we pushed so hard, and we put it on ourselves, but we pushed so hard through the rest of high school that by the time we got to the 12th grade, we're sitting at home, it's like, well, we've got 2 things to do, and it was English work and Bible work. And so we spent about 2 hours out of the day And then it's like, well, now we got to figure out how to fill up the rest of the time. The good thing about that was it allowed us to go to the local community college in our senior year of high school. So we got a jump start on our continuing education in that way, which made it nice, but yeah.
It was a similar story for me. In the younger grades, it was probably that like 3 to 4 hours a day. And as we got older, there was obviously more time that we were dedicating to homeschooling. Because there are a lot of kids in my family, it was typically that my older sister and I, and those that were slightly older, were working on our coursework. There was the curriculum. Mom and Dad had explained this is what we're going to be doing. We were doing that work while Mom was actually actively working with the younger kiddos. And then Mom would cycle back with us and say, okay, what did you do today? Let's pull out the teacher book and see, like, does your math actually line up? Did you get done with that essay? Those kind of pieces as well. So there was the work that we were doing, but then obviously there was that, okay, now let's check back in with our teacher, our parent, and say, okay, what work did we actually get done today? And sometimes that was a day-to-day thing, and sometimes that was a, we'll go over it tomorrow, it'll be fine, we'll get there. Yeah, that definitely happened too.
So, thank you for coming and talking to us today about your homeschool experiences, Nick and Peggy and Elizabeth. We have about 15 minutes before we break for the lunch and the curriculum exchange. So I guess you guys are done. Thank you so much.
Could I share one more quick thing that I've become more aware of as a librarian? When sometimes going to that next step means that it's starting your own business, looking for things you can do at home. Sometimes that means that you're going to be going to college, you're going to be going to a community college, or you're going to be going to a 4-year university. There's also the tech school option that's out there, and that's definitely something that I know that is it's much more available as a message that's getting out there to everyone, but there are so many options in our country, in our area, and look at all of those. And like you were saying, it doesn't have to be right out of the chute. At North Idaho College, there were classes that I really enjoyed, and that kind of pointed me in the right direction. But if college isn't right for you, go mow lawns for one summer, and then go, someone owns a boating business, help them out for a couple of weeks, and try things out. There's so many different things to try out there, and I wanted to put that message out there too. There's not just one size fits all.
Yeah. And if I can just kind of piggyback off of that, a lot of the kids that I knew and grew up with chose to go into apprenticeship positions when they could. One of the girls that I knew, she ended up becoming an apprentice to a jewelry maker. So definitely look at options, like you said, and trade school is also a big thing. It doesn't have to be going to college, and definitely don't stress it too much. Look at all the different options there are, because college isn't always appropriate for where you want to go.
You guys done now?
Yeah, sorry. Stepping off a soapbox.
These are great resources for us, so thank you so much. Elizabeth, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for joining us virtually. I'll come in front of the camera to wave goodbye.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Okay, so Mr. Nick,
Yes.
would you help me